Live moment. Hey, that was faster than I thought. Hey, folks, thanks for tuning in to the Ghost Show, our late night Sunday thing where we talk to Mr. Christopher McLaughlin of Ghost Show Press. How are you doing, Chris?
The professor is doing just as fine as any man with 103 research papers on the other side of this podcast can be.
I'm going to take a drink just because that stresses me out just hearing about.
Seriously.
Are you ready for the intro music? Because we're a high production value kind of professional operation here. You ready? All right, here we go. Sorry, that makes me way too happy. So today we have two esteemed authors from the Transgressive Horror Anthology that is crowdfunding right now on Kickstarter. You should go look for it. First, directly beneath me, the Brady Bunch Great, is Mr. Eddie Webb, star of Stage and Screen. How are you doing today?
Good.
And you will be doing the Hammer version, 1959, of Hound of the Baskervilles.
There were actually there's a lot of adaptations of Hound of the Baskervilles, but that is a specific one we chose for this anthology. Yep.
There's a lot of Sherlock Holmes media out there in general.
Oh my God, yes. It's been going on for 125 years, so there's a lot to catch up on.
Yeah. And over here, directly left of me, in the Brady Bunch Great, is Mr. Aaron Tarbuck. How are you doing, sir?
Very good, thank you.
All right, appreciate you coming out tonight. And you are doing a movie I'd actually never heard of before, Suspiria from 1977. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, Suspiria is one of Dario Argento's films, though he's most famous for his Italian slasher movies, aka Giallos. This is a very dark supernatural film about witchcraft.
Oh, sweet. All right. And before we get any further, I need to throw up the link for the Kickstarter, because this is going on right now. And if you search for Transgressive Horror on Kickstarter, it's the one that's going to come up. But here's the link right here. Pretty easy to find. We ran
the other transgressive horror people right out of business.
we had a conversation. We are exerting undue influence over the horror anthology marketplace that can compete with our monopoly position. But here we are, 3 weeks left. Well, slightly less than 3 weeks. All right, 2.5 weeks left, and 76 backers. We're an up-and-comer. You should check us out. This is going to be we've got a lot of heavy hitters like Mr. Tarbuck and Mr. Webb. Last week we had on, who do we have on last week? Lisa Morton
and Bill Bodden. Yeah.
So and I could go on and on. There's the list of all our writers: Spike Jones, Murray Reeder, James Lauder, Cynthia Celeste Miller. It's going to be a great anthology. People should check it out. And we will be throwing up the link to the Kickstarter several times during the show. But who wants to go first and talk about their essay? Mr. Tarbuck or Mr. Webb? You guys want to do paper, rock, scissors, see who goes first? Or
I'll go ahead and go first.
Okay,
please
cool.
Go for it.
When I was asked to kind of get on this, it's like, we'd love you to do some Sherlock Holmes movies. And I was like, cool, there's a million of them. Can you kind of narrow it down? But obviously, of the Sherlock Holmes stories, Hound of the Baskervilles is the one that's most iconically a horror-based one. It was written as a gothic horror. It was written somewhat reluctantly by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle after he was basically chastised for killing the character off. But a lot of the adaptations really focus on the mystery side of Hound of the Baskervilles. And one of the things that I noticed when I rewatched this recently is the fact that it is very much structured like a horror film. And so there's a lot of liberties taken with the story, which is not at all uncommon for any Hound of the Baskervilles adaptation. But in this particular case, there's a lot of things added to it and adjusted, the entire subplots that are invented really to kind of amp up the horror. So, for example, Sir Hugo, the character who incites the curse of the Hound of the Baskervilles, spoilers for a novel that's 130 years old, but I think the limitations are expired on that. I'm not sure. But Sir Hugo Baskerville does horrible things, which causes his descendants to believe that they have been cursed. And in the novel, it's like 2 paragraphs read aloud by another character, and that's it. And this version, they actually filmed like 10 minutes of Sir Hugo doing horrible things. So really sets the stage for it being definitely structured and presented as a horror film. Certain character motivations are tweaked and changed, and also Peter Cushing is just perfect casting, because I mean, obviously Peter Cushing is the antagonist of most Hammer horror films, but him as Sherlock Holmes has a very distinctive spin and vibe that is, I don't think any other actor could have done in a Sherlock Holmes / horror film.
Oh, cool. I think we just finished the trailer. It's a Hammer horror, so obviously,
Yes.
Yeah.
Cool stuff and interesting stuff. Did you have any surprises writing this essay? It sounds like you're just awfully familiar with the character and with the media. Was there anything?
Oh yeah, like I mean, my tattoos are all Sherlock Holmes based, so I mean, I am a big fan of Sherlock Holmes. But there were a lot of interesting things, like so. Because this is ultimately a horror film, and one of the reasons why I think this is a good choice is that it was transgressive in the fact that Sherlock Holmes kind of goes through rough eras. There's the original canonical era where he's primarily a literary character, and that goes from the 1880s to about 1920, when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle passes. Soon after that, they start doing, they've already done some plays before them, but they start doing radio and television, or movies. And that's your Basil Rathbone era. Everyone knows Basil Rathbone. And a lot of people still identify their perception of Sherlock Holmes as the Basil Rathbone interpretation. He's super smart. He always gets it right. He's always fighting Moriarty, very much in the almost superhero vein. In the 50s, it starts to shift a little bit, but you're still kind of following Basil's lead. This is the first film, and surprisingly early for me. I had always thought that the 60s and 70s were when Holmes starts to get more of the edge, where his cocaine use takes center stage, where he starts to become more fallible. But this film actually pushed that back further than I thought. And by making it a horror film, it really presents Holmes in a much more aggressive light. This is not the Holmes that's charismatic and charming. This is a Holmes who's brusque and doesn't make friends easily. He's pretty raw to Watson in a way that is appropriate to the original material, but is different from what would have been even 15 years earlier for Sherlock Holmes movies. So it's transgressive in the sense that there's this very codified sense of who Sherlock Holmes was, and the movie just said, but we're not doing any of that, which was surprising. And also it had Tarantula, which was great. That's all I see in the movie, but Sherlock Holmes beats the shit out of a tarantula, so that's fantastic.
I have questions about that, but
in the context of its times, it's amazing how Cushing's Holmes relates to his Dr. Frankenstein. Because if you were like watch them back to back, it's almost like Cushing's Holmes is like if Dr. Frankenstein had gone on a slightly more altruistic path. I mean, it's not as huge a leap as you might expect between Holmes and Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah.
It's like those two guys could still hang. They might not be best buddies, but they could chat or something. So yeah, it's amazing in and out of context.
Right, and I joked about the tarantula scene, but it makes a ton of sense. So if you've actually ever read the original Hound of the Baskervilles, Holmes is in very little of it. He's in the first 2 chapters, and he tells Watson, yeah, you go off with Hugo to this creepy dust. I got stuff to do here in London. And he's gone for like half the book. And then he shows up near the end and says, oh, actually, Watson, I figured it all out, and goes there and just wraps the whole case up in like 3 chapters. And that's it. So most adaptations are like, hey, if we're going to do a Sherlock Holmes story, we should put more Sherlock Holmes into it. And so how each adaptation does that is interesting. And of course, this being a horror film, Holmes couldn't be as on top of things as he normally is. So, for example, one of the most iconic scenes is Sir Hugo has one of his boots stolen and replaced. And the reason why is because they're originally steals one of his new boots, puts it back because it's new, then steals one of his old boots because they need to give the dog at the end something to smell to track him down. That's what the whole MacGuffin is. On the film, having 4 people sitting around talking about boots for 15 minutes is not very interesting. So what the Hammer horror adaptation does is they put a tarantula in one of the boots. And so as they're talking about the boot, the tarantula slowly climbs up Sir Hugo's shoulder. And then, of course, Holmes, in pure Peter Cushing fashion, like, stop, don't move, And so you have this interesting kind of horror moment that makes no sense, but it's played off as this was the first attempt to try to kill Sir Hugo. So it takes this scene that's, from a mystery perspective, makes sense. From a horror perspective, it's kind of dull, adds a horror elements to it, and just kind of hand waves it into the plot. But it works beautifully because it's a genuinely suspense moment. You remember that scene where most other Hounds adaptations, you're not going, oh yeah, the boot scene, that was great.
I am now Googling a boot scene just to see if I can find anything.
You'll get a completely different thing from Star Trek, which is interesting for its own sake. No, the other thing that's always fascinating about that film is at the time, as you mentioned, Hammer is working pretty much nearly exclusively with Cushing and Sir Christopher Lee, and Lee, of course, being the great man of letters and books that he was, always wanted to play Holmes, and I'm sure probably had at least some bit of envy for his good friend Peter. And I actually finally got to see, and you may have seen this at the German film where Lee takes over the Holmes role. Have you seen that one?
I haven't seen the German. Is that the Golden Years one?
I can't remember the title that I saw it under.
Okay, he did do a German film, but then he did 4 direct-to-TV movies called Sherlock Holmes: The Golden Years in the 90s.
Oh, this was earlier.
Yeah. And with Patrick McGowan as Watson, which is fantastic.
Well, the black and white German film that I saw, it's one of those that tries to emphasize what a master of disguise that Holmes is. Mm-hmm. But you sort of can't get around the fact that Holmes when he's Lee is 6'6", and all the villains are standing around going like, Holmes is in this room in disguise, and like they're avoiding like the 6'6" guy in the room that has on like a fake beard. It just doesn't work. Just does not.
And the other
work.
thing, a bit of comedy when we first started talking about the anthology, it was like, I'm going to do Hound of the Baskervilles. Like, okay, cool. Which one? The Peter Cushing one. Okay, which one? Because he's done 2 of them.
You got me there.
Yeah, it was. He did this version, and then like a year or 2 later, he got the chance to do it on television. But then that ran out and decided to do some movies, and so during that run, he did a different adaptation of Hound of the Baskervilles, which is closer to the original novel. So he's actually not only played Sherlock Holmes multiple times, but one of the few actors actually played the exact same adaptation twice.
Wow.
Yeah.
You see, you get questions like that. You if you don't already know, you've got the right guy. You call. Okay.
I'm so tempted to ask you your favorite Holmes adaptation, but I imagine that's kind of a huge and windy rabbit hole you probably don't want to go down.
I actually did a long Twitter rant about this a couple of weeks ago because someone posted their top 100 Holmes actors. And to the author's credit, it was they said there's no list definitive, but we're trying to put some on there that most people hadn't heard of. And to be fair, a lot of them I hadn't actually heard of, like Leonard Nimoy playing Sherlock Holmes for like a 1970s like cable television show or something. Peter Capaldi played Sherlock Holmes in a comedy skit, which was actually like both amazing and terrible at the exact same time. I mean, in terms, it depends on kind of what you're trying to accomplish. There's lots of sliding variables for it. Like I've often argued that for a modern day Holmes, I actually prefer Johnny Lee Miller over Benedict Cumberbatch. But if we're talking about classic Holmes, it's got to be Jeremy Brett. Jeremy Brett just blows them all away. He brings a humanity and an eccentricity to Holmes that is just divine and exquisite.
Fair enough. I would like to argue with you about Benedict Cumberbatch, but I can't. So, because I like that show and hate it kind of at the same time. So,
yes, I was with you. It's like when it first came out, I was like, this is going to be amazing. At first season, like, this is pretty cool. And then season afterwards, just like, Whereas Elementary was the reverse. It was like, it's an American show where Sherlock Holmes is in New York and Watson's a woman. It's like, oh, this is going to be awful. And it's one of my favorite adaptations.
Yeah,
Plus,
it's
having the guy from Hackers playing Sherlock Holmes is just also amazing.
Yeah, it worked. I think there's a whole podcast we've done about the many sins of Stephen Moffat, but
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm saying his name wrong, but yeah,
He doesn't deserve his name pronounced correctly. It's fine.
his Dracula adaptation a year or two ago on Netflix, in the pre-plague times, I was so psyched for it, and then got into one episode, I'm like, oh god, this is the same problems I had with his
No, it's
show.
funny because all my family was like going, oh, it's BBC version of Dracula. It's like, who's behind it? It's like Moffat. I'm like, okay, just be aware, we're gonna love it, and then we're gonna hate it. And they're like, okay, fine. And then same thing. I was like, oh, this really good adaptation. Now it's modern day. It's like, what the? Wow.
All right, we say Volume 3. This movie sucks. The worst adaptations of our favorite material.
Oh man, I have so many. I also have my favorite worst adaptation, which is Sherlock Holmes in 22nd Century.
I've not heard it.
It's a Canadian cartoon.
Yes.
No, I'm legit. It is a Canadian cartoon that came out in the late 90s where Sherlock Holmes was kept in honey and resurrected. Watson is a robot that downloaded all of the Sherlock Holmes stories into its brain and went crazy. Moriarty has been cloned. And the show is amazingly bad. And also, I love it to death.
This makes the beginning of the Austin Powers movies sound like a Michael Crichton novel.
If you love terrible 90s cyberpunk, it is the best show ever. And I do love, as someone who actually sought out, lots of the William Shatner Tech War novels. I mean, I am that kind of. I love 90s cyberpunk so much.
Oh gosh!
I would argue
the first.
Yeah, I would argue the first the first Tech War novel wasn't awful for a book written by an actor, or at least a book written by Shatner. But
it's one of those if you look at it for what it is, the first novel is really fun, and I really enjoyed it. Except for the fact that everything starts with plasteel, plast leather,
plast hair.
Right, yeah, plastic, I guess. And it has some stereotypes that have not aged well. I reread it recently, and their perceptions of Mexico are a bit cringy. But other than that, I mean, it's a fun, cheesy 90s, sci-fi thing. A lot of people said, "Oh, hey, William Gibson thinking money. Let's try to get some of that." I mean, I find that entertaining.
Indeed. Well, hey, I did not know this, but Sean Vera says Tech War was ghostwritten. I was unaware.
Yes. Never forget the Mick Foley rule. Publishing is even more fake than pro wrestling.
Because I read this interview with William Shatner where he talked about going home every night to his house in Kentucky, and he had a stack of yellow legal pads and a jar full of pencils, and he was lying. William Shatner lied to me. Oh, and our viewer Sean apparently owns all the episodes of the animated series you were talking about. So you're not the only one.
Sean can back me up on this.
It's fun.
All right, cool.
Oh, you've been exposed to the horror too, Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, I'm so unhip. I'm so left out.
I'm a bit of a Holmesiana person myself. No tattoos.
Excellent.
Well, Aaron, if you're a Holmes fan, we got to give you a chance to weigh in on what are your best and least favorite Holmes adaptations.
Certainly. Once we've already hit the crowning achievement with Jeremy Brett, but when we go a step down, when we go a step down, I'm a big fan of some of the films like Murder by Decree with Christopher Plummer.
Oh yeah.
James Mason as Watson. You've got Donald Sutherland as a psychic. Sir John Gielgud is in it. Tons of wonderful people. It's really a wonderful adaptation. It starts out as a Holmes versus Jack the Ripper, but being based upon the same source material that Alan Moore used for From Hell, it quickly becomes Holmes versus the Masons, and it's a very interesting film. So, Yeah, I really love that one.
By the way, there's the Sherlock Holmes 22nd Century.
Yes, totally.
So if you're looking
Super
for
good
it,
stuff.
here's the DVD.
I'll admit a really good Holmesian adaptation is a Russian series that
Yes.
was done. Oh yeah, here he goes. He's grabbing it. It's really actually a very wonderful. Yep. Very
Yes.
wonderful adaptation. In fact,
Lebedev is a
Queen of
really
herself-
good Holmes.
Yeah, and the Queen of England prefers that series to Brett, but what does she know?
Whoa.
Yeah, no, Lebedev is one of the only two Holmes actors who has a statue with him. Jeremy Brett's the other one.
Yep.
Wow.
Have you seen the
Absolutely.
new version?
Good
Have you
stuff.
seen the new one?
No, I have not.
This one came out 2013-ish. It was definitely heavily inspired by the 2009 movies, so it's much more
Yeah.
action-oriented.
Okay.
But has super high production values, and it's an interesting retread. Watson gets a much bigger role in it. He's an older character, and his military service plays a much higher role. And it's actually some really good acting in it. So it's not Lebedev quality, but it's not bad.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, hearing that is wonderful because, again, one of my favorite all-time Watsons is actually Jude Law. I think Jude Law was a really wonderful Watson and did a fabulous job in that series. But anyways, yeah.
It's not often I get disc envy, but salute.
We'll do that in the
Maybe.
Transformers DVDs over here. Those are the other options.
Oh. All right, Mike, you're muted, buddy.
I was just making jokes I've made before about the failings and successes of the Transformers franchise. Michael Bay's magnum opus, as it were. Aaron, are you ready to talk about Suspiria?
Let's do this.
And was it Phil Collins' best
Witchcraft
song?
has been.
Yeah. Forgive me. I'm sorry.
Whoa.
Let me get the
So
trailer up.
witchcraft has been a theme in films and cinema forever, right? I mean, all the way back to Haxan, etc. But usually witchcraft is handled more as a deus ex machina in most films. It's not really, deeply explored as the subject itself. And I think one of the things that made this film so attractive to me and struck me so hard seeing the original back in its day is that it's this fascinating, intense mixture between Italian giallo or murder mystery that is particularly bloody, which is what the Italian giallo murder mystery films are most famous for, mixing with both supernatural horror and witchcraft and a heavy layering of fairy tale work. There's a lot of deep fairy tale subtext throughout this that is really very fascinating and really informs the tale and narrative itself. For me, really, I think some of the best stuff about Suspiria is the fact also that really it gets deep into a lot of unusual occult and magical practices and brings a level of almost cosmic horror to it, particularly in later films. There's a couple sequels that further expands and further develops the ideas. It's always been very interesting that the same time this film came out, a book was written by the famous Fritz Leiber called Our Lady of Darkness and happened to explore the idea of the mothers of darkness and their effects upon the world as if they were some kind of entities. But that really is more, the subject of my essay. I try to get into the idea of looking at the various metaphysics and philosophies that inform the backstory of Suspiria, the idea of the rule of three and what that has meant culturally and magically for years, the three mothers and the idea of three muses and the various folklore and mythology around all of that. Also exploring the idea of the devil's school. We only see that concept in the West a bit, but in Central Europe and other parts of Europe, it's really a huge idea. The famous origin for Count Dracula we get from Bram Stoker's novel, which really only Dracula Untold, to the best of my knowledge, out of everything, even bothered to touch upon that myth directly, other than a comic adaptation. The idea that there is the Scholomance, the devil's school, and it takes on multiple students. In the most famous legend, it's 13, but only 12 get to leave because the devil takes his own in the end. And of course, really what we're getting in Stoker's novel is the idea that Dracula was that 13th. Because of course, Van Helsing tells us in that book that Dracula is a statesman, a scholar, and an alchemist. versus the usual versions we get since we've over-married him to Vlad Tepes, who was an influence, but not his direct influence when he was writing that book. But that's a diatribe. Witchcraft we've had in film all the time. We get books, movies like Bell, Book, and Candle. We get I Married a Witch, which famously becomes the inspiration for the TV show Bewitched. But again, very few of them get into really weird, dark, scary, magical stuff the way this film did. Some films since have, particularly Roger Eggers' The Witch, really hits some very dark and beautiful occult notes and really touches some strong witchcraft mythology. But this film really went to some very unusual and interesting places. Some of the power of this film really comes from, number one, its famously talked about score by an Italian prog rock band called Goblin. We also have a lot of influence because of its visuals. Its cinematography is from a famous Italian cinematographer. The director, Dario Argento, basically said, I want this to have this larger-than-life, rich, saturated color look, not unlike the original Disney Snow White, which is one of its famous influences. But they brought this level of color and filming to this thing that is pretty incredible when you watch it visually. It was really one of the last films in CinemaScope, and they utilized one of the last machines in Europe before these machines were getting pulled to put it together, to have it have this really crazy, incredible look. Hitting out in 1977, it hits the same year as Star Wars. And like everything else that hits out around that time, really, everything else sort of falls to the side and becomes relegated to cult hits, besides the number one giant box office slamming film, right? But anyways, really an incredible film. Lots of stuff going on in there. As a trigger warning for people, though, it is fairly brutal, fairly bloody. Traditionally, Dario Argento does these giallo films, these Italian murder mysteries that are quite gruesome, quite bloody. Almost everything in that genre tends to be from the later 60s to the 70s up to the 80s. Those films tend to be, in general, these giallo films, the number one influence for the American slasher genre. Carpenter saw this film, was incredibly struck by it. Giallo films deeply influenced Halloween. Even Friday the 13th bears a bit of a pedigree back to an Italian film, and so on. But this film itself, there really has been nothing quite like it over all the years. I've seen a lot of films dealing with magic, witchcraft, horror, the occult, and man, I love Rosemary's Baby. I love The Ninth Gate, a number of other films, but really very few of them quite reach this level of just, immersion into a strange and bizarre, beautiful land. We take a classic heroine on her own hero's journey. We do a journey through the dark woods. We get to the witch's cottage, as it were, which is this dark school. The legend of this film comes from Dario Argento's wife at the time, Nicolota, and she was one who had a grandmother tell her of an experience when her grandmother was up and coming as a famous pianist. When she was little, she was being brought to a school of music. And in that school, it was said that they taught the hard sciences, they taught music, and they taught witchcraft. And she ran away from that school, at least according to the legend. And all of this comes into play into this film. And I think really it's why this stands out from that director's work is that, again, his wife at the time, she really added a strong influence and really brought a whole different level of storytelling that we get in this film. I love Dario Argento. I love a lot of his films. Deep Red is possibly one of his most famous. He made some wonderful cult hits like Phenomena with Jennifer Connelly, pre-Labyrinth, other such things. But really, there's nothing quite like this one.
Well, you have sold me. I'm going to see if I can talk the wife into watching that next movie night. Because she's watched a lot of the movies you mentioned as, being inspired by it. And she forced me to watch The Craft just last weekend. Which,
oh, yes. Lost Boys for Girls? I love that.
Yeah. I'm glad. It's not bad for what it is, but it's...
No, for what it is.
Yeah. So, wow, I have literally never heard this movie existed before, which I don't know how that's been under the... Well, came out the same year as Star Wars. That's, as you say, that's probably why. So
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's one of the humbling and wonderful things about this book is that as I'm past 52 now and starting to accumulate the miles, and part of my audience is telling me they're into old horror films like Scream. Getting the thought that I'm going to be that we'll put this book out and a lot of people will pick it up and they'll read what these fine gentlemen and the other contributors wrote and go, I've never heard of this movie that the guy who edited it has been watching since he was like 4. The fact that we can actually turn people onto these films, it's humbling and wonderful all at the same time.
And I think one of the things that I at least enjoyed working on this essay is talking about kind of the context these films are in and around.
Mhm.
I mean, like Aaron was saying, it's like some of these films, just the way they changed in cinematography and the way that they did things. The fact that Italy became this huge hotbed of horror for quite a while. And there's these different kind of schools of it, and they all shaped not only horror film but just film in general. And it's because I've always had a theory that the less selling or the low budget like films and novels and whatnot sometimes can help shape long-term where media goes. The pulp novels in the 30s and 40s did a lot to reinvigorate like the detective genre. Horror does the same thing for cinematography because they could try things because they had such limited scope and frankly at that time limited audiences, and so they could just try new things and sometimes did some amazing stuff. Hitchcock started that trend, but it kept going on and so yeah, it's nice to not only say, oh hey, here's this cool film I hadn't thought about, but also to read about the context of what's going on, what's exciting about this film. And I think it speaks to like, I know some people are very spoiler adverse, but I am finding, especially with older things like this, it's sometimes good to know going in what you're watching because you can look for it and be like,
Yeah.
okay, I know what to look for. I know what to, I know ahead of time, oh, I should check out for this and keep an eye out for this scene. So some of these cases, like if you're watching these, particularly to learn the context of the culture at the time, it's good to kind of go in with a little bit of awareness.
Yeah, no, well said.
nice. If you hadn't told me it was an inspiration to John Carpenter, just watching that first opening scene we just saw a couple minutes of, and I hope YouTube doesn't give me a takedown notice for that. It reminded me of so many other Carpenter shots I've seen over the years in various movies. So really kind of I could, see where his roots are there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and certainly with Glance, I saw very much that kind of colored lighting as a way of determining a character's emotion. I definitely saw a lot of that happening in that movie, I love that stuff.
Right. Yeah, really, really wonderful work.
Was it? I mean, this was pre-Satanic Panic, right? This was looking at witchcraft without the lens of American Catholicism, American evangelical, early '80s freakout, right?
Correct. Yeah. But what's very interesting is being Italian, a lot of actual European and actual Italian Catholicism somewhat informs the legends and beliefs therein. Because the idea and the belief in the strega, the Italian witch, is such a strong current throughout it. Not directly, addressed within the film's context itself, but it's all there for those who've done the research or done any of the looking. So, yeah.
That is really interesting stuff. I could talk to you a lot longer about this, but I don't want to take up everyone's time tonight, but that is pretty cool. And just to emphasize the point, you can hear all these interesting conversations and thoughts in much greater detail in the Transgressive Horror Anthology. And hey, the Kickstarter link, it's right down there. Please check it out. We've got 17 days left, and would really like to get this book published. So tell your friends, tell your enemies, tell grandma. This is a great Christmas present. Mother's Day. Hey, it's Mother's Day. So, and on that happy thought, any closing thoughts? Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap things up?
I'll go last.
Yeah, please.
Well,
the microphone is yours, sir.
I was going to go last.
Yeah, okay. we're all being too polite. I mean, I guess one last thing I wanted to say was that it was interesting to me that we're talking about horror specifically, because horror itself is transgressive, and so we're talking about horror films that are also themselves transgressive. That ups the stakes. It's like, okay, there's a whole nother layer happening here. So it is exciting to see so many people. And I'm really curious to see what everybody else's essays looks like, because a lot of the folks on there are either friends of mine or people I've admired in the industry, and so being able to read their thoughts and view not only horror through the ages, but also, just like I said, pop media through the ages will be really, really interesting. So yeah, I definitely think people should check it out as much as possible. But if people want to find out more about, want to talk to me about my thoughts or just my inane Sherlock Holmes babbling, I am available at on pugsteady.com. PUGSTEADY is my website. I'm also Pugsteady on Twitter.
Love the Pugmire.
Thank you.
Pugmire is pretty great.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I just wanted to say one of the things that really makes this book great is the fact that, again, Christopher's found people to talk about cinema from, all the way from the 30s and 40s, all the way up through modern films and very contemporary things. You'll see everything from big name films, huge box office blockbusters, to some pretty obscure and odd pieces in there, and everything in between. You're going to see domestic stuff. You're going to see foreign stuff. There's a lot of things that I think really make this book exciting. Like Eddie was saying, I'm damn excited to see everyone else's essays. Several of my favorite films are in there. So I'm just like, oh, this is great. It's going to be a lot of fun to just sit down with this thing at some point. So, yeah. Anyways, please, Christopher.
Well, while I had Aaron here, I also wanted to throw out a little special recognition to the essay that I got from Jay Kovac, who I think you know. Yes. Jay wrote one of the absolutely knock me out of my comfy chair pieces about about a film. Well, really, you couldn't do a transgressive book without talking about the little girl who lives down the lane. Mm-hmm. But writing about that film as a lived experience was just,
oh wow.
My whole plan for this book was ask cool people to be in it, and it has worked out so well. People have given me far better and cooler things than I ever could have possibly believed in. And that's always been my hope and my prayer and my vision for Ghost Show is let writers write. And it is, in terms of the results I've gotten, it's paid off so wonderfully. And talking to these two gentlemen, I think gives you a good sample of the fact that we've taken films that have been written about over and over and over and over again and given you something fresh. If you think you know these films, this will give you another appreciation for them or some additional things to think about. And the reason I wanted to go last was, while I had him here in person, since we haven't get to see each other at a con in forever, right, is to thank him as close to in person as we can manage in these times for being a part of it. I really thank you all for believing in the vision and helping out and sharing your talents. And the results were, oh well, look at that. You're very welcome. I had a split second there. Wait, that's not his cat.
No, she was the cat. Cat disappeared and she came in. Or they came in.
It's like that Terry Garr and Star Trek thing. You remember that? It was, yeah.
Hello. We are nothing but surprises here on the Ghost Show. Yes.
Give it a couple minutes and the cat comes back.
Movie magic.
Spoiler, next week's show, I'm going to disappear halfway through, and this will be Mr. T. Mr. T. There you go.
I think he's on Cameo. We get him for like $8, I think. I think I'm joking.
But thank you guys for being a part of it, and it's an honor and a pleasure to work with you, and a greater honor and pleasure to be able to share what you guys did with the world. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for having us.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. This was a wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Mike.
No, nice to meet you, sir. Nice to meet you as well, Eddie. And Sean is pointing out Ron Goulart, we should give credit where credit is due, was the Tech War ghostwriter. A noted Canadian science fiction author told me he was paid a huge sum to keep his secret for years, which apparently is out. So we got the William Shatner Mafia coming after us. But they're coming slowly with dramatic pauses, so maybe we have a chance.
Oh, there goes a chance for Volume 2. We're all going to die. So.
Only if we can't beat the monkey flip. So might be a chance.
So, by the way, Mike, I was just going to say, obviously, Banff is mostly focused on comics. You really need to do a really cool Halloween one. We really need to cover some very fun.
Oh.
Let me blow you up to a solo layout there. Show me that book again, please.
Oh, yeah, please. I'm
that's-
just amongst a ginormous reread
That is
of
massive.
Marvel 4, and it's so good.
You want to come back in October? We'll have that conversation.
Oh
Heck
yeah.
Let's
Because
do
we are
this.
trying to make the Ghost Show into a going concern on Sunday nights, at least every other Sunday. So.
Oh, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be
Right.
great? And hopefully keep talking about volumes 2 and 3 and 4.
Yeah, future
Yeah.
books. Absolutely.
Sweet.
Heck,
All
doing
right.
a whole book on just horror comics would be really interesting.
Yeah.
It's an underappreciated medium, that's for sure.
It really is. I mean, because there's the EC stuff, there's definitely the 70s Marvel stuff, but I mean, there's also a lot of indie stuff that you can go into, and some of the modern horror stuff is really, really interesting.
Warren Comics.
I still meet people today who, though Sandman and DC's Vertigo line was instrumental in introducing him into a type of horror comic, a lot of them don't realize that a huge chunk of the cast of characters, including some of the famous quote-unquote endless, pre-existed and were horror hosts, horror anthologies at DC, including Destin, who was an old-school just horror host character. Lucy and the Librarian and the Dreaming for Sandman was a horror host for one of the titles. And there's so many fun things to talk about.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we could do a whole show just on the horror comic horror comic pedigree of as you say, Sandman. There's a lot of stuff in there. You just unless you were reading comics before that, and I was, but all I was reading was just X-Men and Giffen and Midas JLA, and then someone was like, "You should stop reading that stuff." Although I would still argue Giffen and Midas JLA was amazing, and they threw that Sandman, the glow in the dark cover at me, and I was like, "Oh wow, this is nothing I'd ever read before." And as you say, there's a lot of pedigree there. You just don't know if you don't know.
Yeah.
And there's also that kind of weird overlap time of like the late 50s, early 60s, where superheroes and horror were mixing. Like the early Fantastic Four issues were straight up horror in a lot of ways, and Doom Patrol really blurred the lines a lot. So there's also another area of like when they're trying to get horror into more acceptable areas because the comic code is really interesting stuff.
Oh yeah.
That struck me watching the HBO. Is the HBO adaptation of Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol?
Mm-hmm.
It really felt in places like kind of a horror comedy, but then a lot of Grant Morrison's stuff in general feels like a horror comedy. So
Totally. And Netflix has got the Sandman series coming. Marvel, in its new set of films, is looking to reinstigate a lot of that Marvel horror into the next line of films.
Yeah,
Really?
they're talking about bringing Blade back.
Yeah, Mahershala Ali is playing Blade.
Oh, nice.
And, I love that actor, so it's going to be incredible.
Yeah, Neil is one of my great inspirations in my current crusade for creative freedom, because I was reading a book about the development of the Sandman motion picture over the years, and Neil was talking about the unique form of depression he got when they handed him a revised script that he'd handed the first draft, handed back the revised draft that opened with Morpheus taking a guy down with his dream kung fu.
Yep.
Wow.
The scene in an alleyway where a gunman's shooting at him and he says, "Foolish mortal, you cannot harm me. I am the Sandman." That was in that script.
The Goldfish Pool and Other Stories by Neil Gaiman. I forget which collections it's been in, but yeah, it details some of his experiences with Hollywood, and good for him for holding out until someone actually got what he was trying to do. Although it's Netflix, God bless him. I mean, sometimes Netflix does great things, and sometimes they do shows that look like they were shot in Vancouver in the 90s with a different direction. And I'm hoping this is one of the first, not one of the latter. But yeah.
You're one of the guys behind the Fighting in Hallways podcast. So
to Sherlock Holmes, Netflix, sometimes you do Enola Holmes, sometimes you do the irregulars.
Yeah.
Well put.
Daredevil, Netflix, season 1 and season 2, I would argue were pretty good. And I can't make that argument about all of their Marvel seasons.
Agreed.
Jessica Jones season 1, going back to colors, mood, beautiful visually. Every use of the color purple in there has a thematic and plot resonance that is fantastic. And also, if you're a fan of Doctor Who, it gets super creepy in addition because of David Tennant's performance is a lot like 10. And it's really, really meta.
And it's a villain that just gets, I know this is an actual word, a villain that gets wronger every single year.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. It's just, it has aged well and badly.
Yeah.
I've been wondering about changing subjects with no meaningful segue at all. I've been wondering about the color out of space. And you guys some people to ask about that. Is that worth checking out or not?
It's honestly one of my favorite Lovecraft adaptations, but I can't be mad at anybody that says I can't watch anything by Richard Stanley at the moment. I totally respect anybody who's saying and feeling that.
Sure. It's a lot more into the pool as the films like Reanimator. It's not quite that gonzo, but it's, we're not trying to be very strictly true to the old fiction, but heck, regardless of that director and that thing, even Lovecraft himself is a bit problematic to say the least, right? As a writer. And I have to admit, I love where cosmic horror has gone outside of that author. I like how it's developed, how other people have moved it on. Folks like Laird Barron, etc. But by the way, I just saw somebody typing. I just saw somebody typing and showing the detail of the writer Marv Wolfman almost getting banned because of the Comics Code because his name Wolfman. It was hilarious. It was also quite the joy when Marv Wolfman, the Wolfman himself, was writing Werewolf by Night for Marvel, which is my favorite Marvel character.
The main character, Jack Russell.
Yes, exactly.
The
sense of humor in the name.
The runner-up, Herman Shepard. He was almost Herman Shepard.
Yep.
Did you guys see that Sandy Peterson video a couple weeks ago about was Lovecraft racist?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that was kind of funny.
Oh my God.
It was.
It's 2 minutes long, but I mean, there's enter a title, and then there's Sandy just looking straight in the camera and saying yes, and then there's 2 minutes.
Rolls the credits. Yeah,
rolls the credits. Yeah,
perfect.
I would play it because it's hilarious, but I don't want to steal his content, and also YouTube is the bots are awfully quick with C&D notices, so I'm trying to be cool. So. Yeah. All right. Well, hey, this was a fun show. We should have you guys back, and definitely let's do that. Let's do that Marvel horror show. I would love to do that in October.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Believe it or not, I don't know how it happened, but it's May 2021, and Halloween will be here in just 5 short months, which in COVID time will be something like next week. So. Although they say, well, let's talk about COVID. We've been talking for almost an hour. That's a good link for a show. Thanks to all our listeners and viewers out there on the internet. Please share this show with your friends, with your enemies, with mom, with grandma. Please share our Kickstarter with all those people I just mentioned. We need to get the word out there. We need to get the word out there a lot right now. So please push this as far as you can. Once again, Eddie Webb, Aaron Talbert, Christopher McLaughlin, thanks for coming out.
And Jay and Aaron's cat.
Yes.
We're totally different people.
They are not the same. Don't. All right. We will catch you next time. Next Sunday, we are doing another episode of the Ghost Show. So please check us out then. We'll talk more about horror movies. And see ya.
Cool.